Hello, we're going to be continuing our conversation about the Cold War, specifically about how the Cold War begins. So, we are in the same textbook that we were last time, Prentice Hall, United States History, Modern America. You can find this online at the National Emergency Library or the National Emergency Archive. And we're going to talk about the beginning of the Cold War. So, the Cold War begins. Why it matters. In the 1930s, the policies of isolationism and appeasement had contributed to the rise of dictatorships and the outbreak of global war. After World War II, U.S. leaders viewed these past policies as mistakes. They sought new ways to keep the United States safe and to protect its interests around the world. So, as we are going through this lesson, your focus question should be how did U.S. leaders respond to the threat of Soviet expansion in Europe? So we're going to start by talking about the roots of the Cold War. When Franklin Roosevelt died in April of 1945, the nation was at a critical point. The United States was still at war. In addition, relations with the Soviet Union, one of the most important wartime allies, was beginning to break down. American and Soviet systems differ. The United States and the Soviet Union had been united only in their opposition to Nazi Germany. Beyond that, they had little in common. The United States was a capitalist democracy. Its citizens believed in free elections, economic and religious freedom, private property, and respect for individual differences. The Soviet Union was a dictatorship. Under Joseph Stalin, the Communist Party made all key economic, political, and military decisions. The Soviet people could not worship as they pleased, own private property, or express their views freely. Those who opposed or questioned Stalin risked imprisonment or death. Allies disagree on the future of Eastern Europe. By the time Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill met at Yalta in February of 1945, it was clear that the Allies would defeat Germany. But it was unclear how Germany and the nations of Eastern Europe would be governed after the war. Soviet troops had already occupied much of Eastern Europe and some of Germany. Stalin wanted to keep Germany weak and divided. He also wanted Eastern Europe to remain under the control of the Soviet Union. The United States and Great Britain sought a stronger, united Germany and independent nations in Eastern Europe. At the conference, Stalin agreed to establish broadly representative governments and free elections in Eastern Europe, and to divide Germany only temporarily into zones of occupation. Despite Stalin's promises, nearly all the lands occupied by the Soviet Red Army in the spring of 1945 remained under Soviet control after the war. The Eastern European countries of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, as well as the eastern portion of Germany, became satellite states under the control of the Soviet Union. Truman and Stalin clash at Potsdam. By the time Soviet, British, and U.S. leaders met at Potsdam in the summer of 1945, Harry Truman had succeeded Roosevelt as president. Truman and Clement Attlee, the new British prime minister, hoped that Stalin would confirm the decisions made at Yalta. However, Stalin refused to make a commitment to allow free elections in Eastern Europe. Truman left Potsdam believing that the Soviet Union was planning world conquest and that the alliance with the Soviet Union was falling apart. With the Soviet Red Army at his command, Stalin seemed to present a real threat. Thus, the stage was set for a worldwide rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The 46-year struggle became known as the Cold War because the two superpowers never faced each other directly in hot military combat. Checkpoint. How did the goals of the US and Soviet foreign policy differ after World War II? Well, the way that these differ is that the Soviets want to have control over the things around their border so that they can create a buffer zone of friendly governments because they had just been invaded by Germany. Now, when the United States sees this happening, we think the worst and we believe that Stalin and the Soviets are trying to just take things over and for conquest, kind of like what Hitler did. So there's an understanding misunderstanding between the two sides, and that's what's going to start this conflict. They each have their own goals and objectives, and the other side doesn't know really what they are. All right, So until next time, stay safe.